All right, we are live. You are now officially on the show. Matthew Zipkin, thanks for joining. And
Thanks for having me.
yeah, I'm excited to dive in. Why don't we just kick it off? Do you want to just give me a little update on what you're working on and what you find interesting in crypto?
Sure. Okay. Wow. Really big, broad questions. I guess I'll
Yeah.
start with the thing that's on my mind most, which is Handshake. Handshake is a blockchain project that mainnet launched almost a little over a year ago. It is an alternative DNS root zone secured by proof of work. So it is a proof of work blockchain. It is Bitcoin-like. If you know the difference between the account model and the UTXO model, it is the UTXO model, like Bitcoin. It does not have smart contracts like Ethereum. And it has one primary built-in application, which is to be a DNS root zone. And I'll go into the details of that, I'm sure, as we go forward. But the reason I like it is because there are a lot of altcoins and a lot of blockchain projects, and many of them are designed to either compete with Bitcoin or just to solve one problem, which is how do I transfer value from one person to another. And people come up with great proof of work algorithms and new privacy schemes, and these all have different values to add. But Handshake, the point is this DNS thing, and the fact that it has a built-in application makes it interesting to me and adds value to the ecosystem as opposed to just like, say, competing with Bitcoin. So we can talk more about that, or I can finish your question and tell you what other things I find interesting about crypto.
Well, actually, let's postpone that part. I want to hear more about Handshake. So I met you through the Purse founder, Andrew, is my business, which I'm now not working on anymore. It's just going well. Redeem is it's like a secondhand gift card and peer-to-peer trading platform. Started in 2018, and Andrew was working on Purse, similar space with like Amazon gift cards and trading. And I came to know him, and then through you, because you and your team built bcoin, which is freaking awesome. bcoin.io is a open source protocol framework for facilitating Bitcoin wallets, and you probably have other wallets on there. You may. But I was just so blown away by the. It's one of those projects that just enables so many other things to grow on top of it. We couldn't have existed, period, if it wasn't for Bitcoin. And that's just, kudos to you, man. For I think, were you the lead developer on Bitcoin? No.
I'm glad you brought that up, and actually, I still chat regularly with Kyle Hill, your co-founder, I guess.
Yeah.
And Redeem uses bcoin, so I'll talk briefly about what bcoin is because it plays into the Handshake story as well. I'm definitely not the lead developer. Bcoin is an alternative implementation of the Bitcoin protocol, and what I mean by that is your audience is probably familiar with Bitcoin and how there's something called a full node, or something called Bitcoin Core, which is a piece of software that does the Bitcoin protocol. And it was initially written by Satoshi Nakamoto. And now here we are 11 years later, is currently maintained by a group of other very, very smart people. Bitcoin Core is not the only software program that does Bitcoin. You can think of how Chrome, Safari, Firefox, these are all different computer programs that all do the same function: web browsing, HTML, HTTP, HTTPS, that kind of stuff. So there are alternative implementations of the Bitcoin protocol, and Bcoin is one of those. Bcoin is written in JavaScript, in particular for the nodejs environment. And there are other implementations of Bitcoin too. There's one called BTCD, written in a language called Golang, and there's others. So this isn't a totally crazy idea. Although some people do think that implementing Bitcoin in JavaScript is a crazy idea. So, that's a worthwhile conversation to have. Bitcoin, as you mentioned, was developed it was actually invented and started by this very smart developer named Fedor Dutney, who works as part of the Node.js core team. So he is like one of the top 10 JavaScript people on earth, and started writing Bitcoin as a very simple proof of concept to do some Bitcoin stuff in JavaScript. That project was taken over by Christopher Jeffrey, aka JJ. who really brought it into fruition and made that little seed of a project into a complete full node, a fully validating node. It can validate all blocks and all transactions on the Bitcoin network. And it has a very interesting wallet, which is why Purse.io, who hired JJ as their CTO a million years ago, why they wanted him to continue this project. And because Purse had very specific wallet needs that were not really available in Bitcoin Core, especially at the time, 2015. So a lot of people were implementing their own wallets or writing applications built on the Bitcoin Core wallet. They went the extra step and rebuilt an entire library and full node. So Bcoin was developed by Purse. Purse uses it. Purse, is like you said, and also Redeem.io, Redeem with 3 E's.io. These are both companies that accept Bitcoin transactions, and instead of running Bitcoin Core, they run Bcoin, and they get a different feature set out of that. I'm not sure when, and I can tell you like how I got hired and stuff. It's kind of fun. But I'm not sure when Handshake sort of developed out of that. But JJ, who is the lead developer for Bcoin, and some other people had this idea for a decentralized root zone and certificate authority. And because JJ had already implemented all of Bitcoin, the natural thing to do to create an altcoin was to modify that code. Altcoins like, let's say, Litecoin or Zcash or Dash, these altcoins were developed by taking Bitcoin Core, written in a language called C++, and changing parameters and making a new blockchain. Handshake is an altcoin that is made from Bcoin and not Bitcoin Core. And that's not the first time this has ever happened either. There's another cryptocurrency called Decred. Decred is a fork of BTCD, which I mentioned a minute ago is an alternative Bitcoin implementation written in Golang. So it's kind of interesting. It's not, we are missing a lot of features that Bitcoin Core has. And therefore also, Litecoin and Dash have those features. We have features that Bitcoin Core doesn't have that, we inherit from Bcoin. And that is how Handshake came about and why Handshake is related to Bcoin, and is also why I got involved in Handshake, because I was hired by Purse in 2018 to work on Bcoin. And that turned into working on Handshake, which is what I'm doing full time now.
And tell me and listeners as well, what's the vision with Handshake? What do you hope it becomes?
Great. Okay. So, so like I said, it's a alternative DNS root zone secured by proof of work. It's an alternative DNS root zone. What the hell does that mean? Okay, great. So let's talk about DNS for a second. Domain name system. This is the phone book of the internet. This is, you can, it's easy for humans to remember something like google.com, or here we're using zencaster.com. You could just tell me to go to zencaster.com. Your computer does not go to zencaster.com. Your computer goes to 100.204.16.8, or something like that. Computers find each other, right? Their IP address. Computers find each other on the internet using Internet Protocol. That's what IP stands for. The DNS, domain name system, is the protocol by which your browser takes input like google.com and figures out what IP address to actually send messages to. Messages like, hey, give me this web page, and messages like, here's your web page, and all that kind of stuff. So that's DNS. DNS is already a decentralized system. It runs on, I don't know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of computers around the internet. So to say, we're not decentralizing DNS. However, there is a hierarchical architecture to DNS, and it's very easy to see. For example, if you look at mail.google.com, as you read it from left to right, things get kind of more general, right? Or if we read it from right to left, which is actually the hierarchy of DNS, it goes from right to left. Com, Google, or mail, So com, we know there's tons of .coms, google.com and facebook.com. What do they have in common? There's this com thing. And then once you're at google.com, you're inside of Google's namespace, and then google.com can have mail.google.com, photos.google.com, www.google, search.google.com, like that. So you can see there's a hierarchy that goes from right to left. And that .com is something called a top level domain, or a TLD. And there are several of them, and there's actually hundreds, and you can think of a couple off the top of your head. .com, .org, .info. These are all top level domains. .io, sure. And those top level domains belong to a pinnacle namespace, a point of centralization called the root zone, the root zone, and the root zone is represented by a dot under the hood in DNS. So if you look at a URL, it's actually mail.google.com dot, and that dot represents the root zone. And the root zone is maintained by central authorities, by ICANN and IANA. And these are nonprofit companies that, claim to be doing good for the internet and for everybody, but they are run by elites, and they do censor people, and it's very expensive to participate in their organization. And it's a central point of failure, security wise.
How do they get this position? So technically they're the, what are they technically, like the printer of the address book? Like they have the database of all the IP addresses and who owns them, or
sure,
how does that work?
Sure. So because of the hierarchical structure of DNS, what they have control over is just the root zone. So they tell your computer, they have the phone book for just the TLDs. So they know the IP address for .com and the IP address for .org and the IP address for .info and .us. And actually what happens under the hood when you type in a URL is something called recursive resolution. There's a multi-step process where first the computer looks up the root zone, and then it looks up .com, and then it looks up google.com, and then it looks up mail.com. So the whole process goes like this. Mm-hmm. Computer's like, hey, root zone, what's the IP address for .com? And the root zone is like, oh, here's the IP address for .com. Great. Then you send a message to that IP address. Hey, .com, what's the IP address for google.com? And that server is like, oh, google.com is this IP address. And then you send a message to that IP address. Say, hey, google.com, what's the IP address for mail.google.com? Finally, you get your answer. The page loads in the browser. Everybody's happy.
Very, very similar to how mailing addresses work, right? Like I live in the United States. I live on Earth in the United States, and then Connecticut.
Great.
Yeah.
Great comparison. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Earth, zip code, state, city, street, address, apartment number, bedroom, corner of the bedroom, pile on the corner. Yeah, exactly. It goes like that. So at the top of this authority pyramid, DNS is all about delegated authority. And at the top, the pinnacle of what do they call it? The apex predator. Of the apex of this system is an organization called ICANN. And I'm not going to act like I have the history memorized. And, there's a lot of people that hate ICANN. A lot of people love ICANN. And I'm not really going to be super activist about it. I'm not sure what the history is. The internet was in large part invented in the United States and, between connecting universities. And at the time, DNS was like a file that these nerds would email each other, which was literally just names and IP addresses. And eventually they needed to create some type of organization and make it more public. And I'm not sure what happened there. The United States government, what's the word? Not sanctioned, but chartered, IANA, which then chartered ICANN and something like that. People are going to hate me for getting this wrong.
So wait, quick question. When I go to like GoDaddy or Google Domains and I buy a domain, Google they're submitting a request to ICANN to tell Google that I now own this, or Google owns it, and by proxy I have access to it through Google.
Sure. Yeah, good question. So again, ICANN just maintains the root zone where the top level domains are, and the top level, the root zone. I put the in air quotes because Handshake is about to break everything. But in the root zone, the content of the root zone changes very rarely and slowly every couple of years. And there's TLDs like .com, .org, .info, and you might have seen in the last decade or so some more interesting ones. Like my band has a URL on .space. And I don't even know what else are .community, and like they're starting to get more interesting than just these 2-letter, 3-letter names. So every now and then, every 5 or 10 years, ICANN will add top level domains to the root zone, and this is obviously a very, very lucrative thing. Let's say you are allowed by ICANN in their holy power to own the TLD .sex. how much money are you going to make, and so how much money is ICANN going to charge you for to add your IP address to .sex in the root zone, or like .com. Everybody, well, it's different now. In the 90s, .com was how you knew you were dealing with a real company, and like .org and .o were different. Things are different now. But like, if I'm like, oh yeah, check out my cool business, it's at like mattsawesomebusiness.garbage. It's like, okay, I don't know. Like, there's something about value and names that we've just kind of learned. So,
.com is clean, man. People know it. They like it. .io I think is cool, but if you have like a I don't know, whatever some random one is, JP, it's like, there's just not. It's kind of branding too. Like startups tend to do .io. Obviously, there's .org, .edu.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah, and like .dev is owned by Google, and Google, by the way, has a top level domain. There is a .google. I'm not sure what they're using it for, but they do own it. It is in the root zone. So, I have MatthewZipkin.com. There's no content there. There will be eventually. It used to be. My audio career was I had a blog there, and now I'm trying to move everything to Handshake domains. But so I own MatthewZipkin.com. I created an account on GoDaddy, which I now regret. I only use Namecheap now. I bought MatthewZipkin.com. So what was happening there? Well, .com is owned by a company. I'm pretty sure it's VeriSign, and VeriSign is allowed to manage the .com namespace because they were, they paid or probably continue to pay ICANN for it. And so lots of companies are actually able to register domains in the .com namespace. Like you can go to Namecheap and get MatthewZipkin.com. You can go to GoDaddy and get Namecheap.com. And what's actually happening under the hood is each of those websites is like a front end. They have their own customer service, their own interface, their own pricing structure. But at the internet level, under the hood, they're both going back to the same stock room, which is VeriSign's .com registry. And they have some kind of internal price, and then GoDaddy and Namecheap basically compete to resell names with that registration fee. So that's what happens when you get a name, when you buy a name now. And once I own MatthewZipkin.com, I can sell subdomains if I wanted to. I assume that's legal, or I could at least give you mike.matthewzipkin.com. Maybe I charge you $1 a year for that, and you can have your own email address, mike@mike.matthewzipkin.com.
Right.
Or I could have email.matthewzipkin.com, band.matthew, food.
It's like subleasing your sections of your house, which, by the way, this is super interesting. I think people would find this, I find it fascinating because it's like we use this stuff all the time, but people don't really know how it works underneath the hood. So, yeah.
Right.
Keep going.
Yeah. And so that's how DNS works. And so it is already decentralized. Like I said, com, org, info, they run their own computers. They have their own employees. They manage their own security. If com goes down, org and info are still up. And so it's decentralized as soon as you get past the root zone, and then of course, Google.com, Facebook.com, each manage their own namespace. But that root zone at the top is centralized. And as Bitcoiners, we are used to owning things with our own private keys and not having to worry about what happens if a custodian goes down or what happens if a custodian gets hacked. And we like to own things. We don't, we like when you buy a movie on Amazon, you don't get anything. Amazon can just stop playing that movie for you. You don't really own that.
Yeah. Technically, like if you had MatthewZipkin.com. Like GoDaddy could take it down, VeriSign could take it down, and it's like who's the apex there?
VeriSign or Veritas or whoever it is.
Yeah. But like multiple people across the chain could take it down. Which
Absolutely.
Is kind of disturbing.
You've totally got it. Just like if you keep your Bitcoins on Coinbase, you might wake up one day and you don't have them anymore. Or if you keep your money in Wells Fargo, you might wake up one morning and your money isn't there. And Bitcoin solves that problem. I got my private keys, they're encrypted, they're stored in a very secure way. No one's going to take that Bitcoin from me. I have ways to recover it. I can be anywhere in the world and recover that Bitcoin and spend it. And it's censorship resistant and non-custodial. And so after 10 years of Bitcoin being around, it's hard to look at this DNS system and be like, well, wait, really?
Yeah, totally.
And when I start telling you about how certificate authorities work, it's this whole other thing. Like maybe you want to hear about some of the details, but there's this whole other system that makes websites secure, and it's called certificate authorities. And this is the difference between HTTP and HTTPS.
Right. Yeah.
In your browser, when you go to google.com, you'll see a lock in the corner, and that means that your browser has a secure encrypted channel to google.com. And not every website has that. It's easy and it can be free to set up HTTPS, but not every website has it. And that security is a separate system that's separate from DNS, and it's called Certificate Authority. And it works in the same kind of hierarchical way where you generate a private key for encryption purposes, and that private key is signed by an organization, and their key is signed by another organization, and eventually it goes up to the top. And if you're curious, you can poke around in your computer and actually see the list of trusted certificates that your operating system just has. When you buy a brand new Mac or a Windows computer, you can go look at the certificates, and there's all these companies and their keys that you just trust. And that's the basis of SSL, of HTTPS. When you see that lock in your browser, what that means is that some company that your operating system trusts the website you're looking at. And that's another kind of thing where it's like, really? There could be revocability there. Maybe you're publishing rebellious political views and your certificate gets revoked. Once the encryption is broken, people can change the way your content looks. You wouldn't want to enter your credit card number into an insecure site.
Yeah, it feels so topical, all this stuff, because even just, we're recording this end of March 2021, and the U.S. election was like the end of the U.S. election with Trump leaving and Trump getting banned from Twitter. And then Parler was like a libertarian, independent, free voice platform. And then everyone just removed Parler because they were fearful that like he would join or something. There was the whole thing was just like, it was like, what the F just happened? And now we got Apple took them down, and Amazon, AWS took them down. It's like when we say these things that, VeriSign or, Apple would take you down. Most people think, my website, my donut shop is never going to be taken down. Why would it be taken down? I'm not doing anything to be taken down for. But it's not. I almost think it's like, when the waves are calm and there's no storm, you have nothing to worry about. But what if like things change, and they change dramatically, and all of a sudden we're on this antiquated, centralized permission software setup? It's like you kind of just want to set yourself up to have it decentralized and just on principle have control over it. So it feels like now is the right time. I'm sure there's going to be another swell where collectively we're just very concerned about centralized control, particularly with media organizations. YouTube, Google, Facebook are kind of in the spotlight for this exact thing, which is, to your point. So Handshake, how do you guys set this up? Is it conceptually just like blockchain where it's redundant databases on multiple nodes, and that kind of using consensus determines who owns the key to each website? Am I saying this right? Tell me.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you got it. It's very similar. So remember, the root zone is the thing that we care about. So Handshake produces an alternative root zone, which means we have names and IP addresses, or DNS records associated with names. And it opens a lot more than just DNS because you can own your name. So, around the coin, you could have the name around the coin on Handshake. That would be a top level domain because Handshake is a root zone. So you could have a website at https:// around the coin. That's it. No dots, no subdomains, no com info, just that. Awesome. And, you could have email addresses, mike.aroundthecoin, matt.aroundthecoin, like that. And it's your own namespace. It's a very powerful thing. And the fact that people make so much money selling subdomains on exciting TLDs like .com.info or .sex or whatever, whatever you can think of, like .email, .security, .donuts, .food, all these top level domains that ICANN has not or may never release. own those on Handshake and sell subdomains or make your own content, and nobody can take it away from you. So you're right. There's keys involved. I'll tell you how you get a name on Handshake in a second. But once you have a name on Handshake, you own it the same way you own a Bitcoin. You have a private key. You can store it on a hardware wallet. You can trust an exchange with it. I don't recommend that, but there's a very good exchange called namebase.io that was launched specifically for Handshake. Not only do they exchange HNS, our coin, with dollars and Bitcoin, but they also do the DNS registrar stuff. So you can think of Namebase as a combination of between GoDaddy and Coinbase kind of smashed together. And then, ideally you run your own full node and you have your own private keys and you keep them secure. And then you have this name that nobody can take away from you, and you can add DNS records to that name. And people who want to browse to Handshake domains, they can do so in any browser. It doesn't need a special browser the way that Tor needs a special browser. And there's lots of ways to access it. Obviously, you got to do something. Have to do something. Have to install something, change a setting. You have to opt in. People are like, can I see your Handshake name on my regular browser right now? And it's like, well, no. And people are like, well, that's not convenient. I'm not going to use it. And it's like, okay, I understand that. But we are talking about cryptocurrency here. We're talking about security, decentralization, censorship resistance, activism. These things are hard. Convenience is our biggest enemy. Think about how many people own Bitcoin, but really they just have an account on Coinbase. Like, glad you're interested, but you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, totally.
So there's lots of ways to browse Handshake. The best way is to run a Handshake full node. The full node comes built in with a DNS resolver. So I'll explain it like this: you install the Handshake full node on your computer somewhere or in your network somewhere, and then you change your DNS settings in your operating system to use that for name lookups. And that's it. You got to get a Handshake resolver somewhere, and then you got to tell your computer to use it. And maybe some of your listeners are familiar with DNS services like 1.1.1.1, which is run by Cloudflare, or 8.8.8.8, which is run by Google. These are public DNS services. And the reason they have such simple IP addresses is because they're just as easy to remember as names like google.com.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes sense. If you can remember 1.1.1.1, and I think you can probably remember that, that's all you need. And then your computer can do all the other DNS lookups, like, Pepsi-excitingcontest.org. 1.1.1.1 can look that up for you. Okay, so to browse Handshake, you got to install something, and you got to set your computer to use that thing. There are also some public Handshake resolvers. Namebase runs one. I run one. My company Impervious runs another.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, please do.
You have the resolver running. The resolver is just like a node and it's like a Bitcoin node effectively, where it's storing encrypted all the domains.
Sure. You're right. I skipped a step. So in the beginning, when we were talking about DNS, and I said, you type a URL into your browser, and then there's this process where first you ask .com for an IP address, then you ask google.com for an IP address, then you ask mail.google.com for an IP address, and finally you see it. That recursion is done by a program called a recursive resolver. And interestingly, it's not standard for each individual computer to do that process on their own. Normally it's outsourced, like 1.1.1.1 run by Cloudflare does that. So if you have 1.1.1.1 set up on your computer, every time you type a URL into your browser, that URL is sent to Cloudflare, and then they do that recursive resolution, top level domain, second level domain, subdomain, and then they send you back the final product, which means you're giving away a lot of privacy. This recursive resolver knows every website you go to.
Oh, that's like a key point. I feel like when you're going to sell Handshake to people, that's the thing. It's like, somebody knows every website you go to, everything. Right. Yeah, and then people are like, all right, well, I think that's a more powerful sales pitch than you have a website and you're fearful that it's going to be taken down. I think
sure. You're right. I'll start opening with that. What's funny about Handshake is you don't need Handshake to run your own recursive resolver. The other thing that's very common is you get Verizon installed in your house, and you get your router plugged in. Your computer connects to it, and usually in that case, Verizon will do that DNS resolution for you. If you open up your settings, you'll probably see that you're using Verizon.com for your DNS. So that's somebody else is seeing all the websites you go to. And even, if we don't even want to talk about Handshake for 1 second, like you said, it makes sense to run your own DNS server either on your computer or on your home network. And it's an extra step, but it does give you that privacy. And in addition, there's some other interesting DNS projects out there outside the blockchain space. One is called Pi-hole, so named because I think the idea is you run the software on a Raspberry Pi. And what Pi-hole does is it's a DNS server for all the machines on your network. And it's called Pi-hole because it's kind of like a black hole. And they have a block list built into Pi-hole that mainly blocks like adware and malware sites. So if you go to like Reddit and or whatever site you're looking at, some CNN, and there's all these ads, those ads are all coming from like adserver.ad.org or something. And what Pi-hole does is it simply does not make those DNS requests. So your computer, following the instructions that your computer thinks that what it wants you to do is to download content from adware.ads.org. And Pi-hole is like, no, I'm not going to answer that question for you. I'm not going to resolve that name. And so the ads don't show up in your computer. Huh. So
that's good.
Yeah, lots of good reasons.
Isn't that similar to how I use Brave and as a browser instead of Chrome? And that seems to be like their main, they're like a main pitch is they want to be between the ad networks and the publishers. So they want to, the whole point of like the BAT Brave attention token, which I love this project years ago. It was the creator of JavaScript, Jonathan
Brendan E.
Brendan, there you go.
Yeah,
I was way off. I got his face in my mind, but he created this to shortcut. Like if I want to advertise on the internet, I have to go through Google, buy ads, then people go in the browser, they search on Google, and then me as a user, I see the ads come up. But if you could go direct and use the basic attention token, then companies could pay people to view. You could literally get paid to surf the internet and watch ads, or you can just pay money and not have any ads directly. So I just love that model.
Yeah. And as a Bitcoiner, I'd love to also see things like Lightning Network, and micropayments take over for ad placements. Monero is another cryptocurrency where you can mine Monero coins without special hardware. And, you could go to a website where as long as you're looking at the website, watching a video or reading an article, instead of looking at ads, you're actually mining cryptocurrency for that provider, that kind of thing. It seems like, aren't we beyond ad supported everything now? Yeah, it seems like there's a lot.
Google would never say so.
Right, exactly. Well, you kind of, and that, like, oil companies are also investing in solar technology too. Google's smart. They know people hate ads. I'm sure they're thinking of stuff like micropayments or like this basic attention token thing or whatever. Like,
I think that was the whole reason Google became so diverse in their projects that they build. They were so successful with search, and there's one school of thought that says like double down on search, just win all day because it prints money. But yet they build 100 other products because they know one day search is going to be antiquated or at least dramatically changed. So smart. True. And I think that paved the way. Like Amazon, now they offer 100 products, and it kind of becomes except for Apple, they kind of just stick to hardware.
Right.
I want to ask you about the token. So you guys created, you have the concept to decentralize DNS entirely, and then the token. How does that come about as a core part of the experience?
Great. So Handshake is its own blockchain. It works like Bitcoin, where there's proof of work miners, and they generate a coin called HNS that can be spent just like Bitcoin. You don't have to do any of the DNS stuff. We have all the same functions that Bitcoin does, like multi-sig, and you could do Lightning Network kind of stuff if your audience is familiar with that on Handshake too. So how do we get from the coin to the name? Well, here's how it works. You need the coin to acquire names on the blockchain, and you need the coin to update the DNS records on the blockchain, and to pay miner fees for all these types of things. So the life cycle of a name on Handshake, it begins with an auction, and the auction is kind of like something known as a Vickrey auction, in which the winner, whoever places the highest bid, pays the second highest bid price. So if you and I are the only two bidders and I bid 20 and you bid 10, I win, but I only pay 10. And this is, theoretically an effective way to discover the market value of an asset. And it also kind of works like if you're familiar with eBay, how you can place a max bid and it'll auto bid for you. Maybe you place a maximum bid of 1,000 and then someone comes in and bids $1. Now your bid is automatically $2. And then someone else comes and bids $5 and your bid is now automatically $6. And it goes up like that. And eventually, you pay that $6. Your max bid is 1,000, but what you really end up paying is $6, or you could think of it as the second highest bid. So that's how the auctions work on Handshake. More interesting. So technically the life cycle goes like this. Like you think of a name, let's say Around the Coin. In fact, it would be cool if I could like screen share and do this all live, but we could just imagine it for now. And your audience can look at the interface in the wallet and on namebase.io later. Around the Coin probably is not been auctioned off yet. I'm willing to bet that that's a new name. So it starts with an open. You send a transaction on the network using HNS coins. You basically send a zero value transaction. You send money to nobody, but you do have to pay a miner fee, which is negligible. It's a few pennies. But you need Handshake coins to be able to do so. And you announce to the network that Around the Coin is now open for auction. And after a few blocks go by, people can start bidding, and anybody can bid on the name Around the Coin, not just you. So if you have a really good name, like food, just because you thought of it doesn't mean that you're going to end up with it. The names are auctioned, and we want to try to find the fair market value of this asset Around the Coin.
How do you determine the order of the names to auction?
Cool. So anybody. There's no order. There's no predetermined schedule. Anybody can think of any name and open an auction for that name. Complete gibberish. Up to there are. We still subscribe to some legacy DNS limits, like 64 characters. The names have to be letters and numbers and dashes only. You can't start with a dash. There's some rules. There's some limits. But interestingly, so this phase has passed, but the first year of Handshake. To prevent squatting by early adopters, names were not all available on the first day. And I think this is possibly a drawback of Namecoin when Namecoin launched. You can imagine like, hey, we're announcing Handshake today and anybody can open any name they want. And then like all the best names go to basically the first two users on the first day.
Right.
So Handshake had an interesting system, which was a rollout that lasted 52 weeks. And there's an algorithm. It's complicated. It doesn't matter. But like Around the Coin, you put it through the algorithm. The algorithm says this name is available on week 20. And so you cannot start an auction for that name until you get to that.
Got it.
So this was obviously a very common question. The first year of Handshake's life, people were like, why is it saying I can't start this auction yet? And it's like, okay, here's why. That first year is up. So if a name hasn't been auctioned off already, you can auction off a name at any time. And that's how it starts. And then people bid for 5 days. Bids are allowed. Bids are blinded. This sort of gets interesting. They're kind of blinded. They're kind of not. Let's see if I can make this sound less technical than it is. But basically, the first thing you do is you lock up coins. So I'm going to bid Around the Coin. I start by locking up 10,000 HNS. And then in the later stage, after 5 days of these bids being placed, everybody has to reveal their bid. You absolutely have to reveal your bid. You cannot participate in the auction unless you reveal. So that's another transaction. And I reveal like, yes, I locked up 10,000 HNS, but really my bid was only for 100. And that's how bids are sort of blinded. So if you look at auction activity during the 5-day bidding phase, you'll see there's a bunch of people bidding on the name Around the Coin. This guy has locked up 10,000. This guy's locked up 100,000. This guy's locked up 100. Those aren't their actual bids. You still don't know who won. You still don't know what the highest and the lowest bids are until the reveal phase.
And you guys are through this process of the first year of like slow rolling these out. So now at this point, anyone could go and bid for a domain, is put a domain up for auction and do a bid. So if people wanted to go to Handshake, buy 100 domains, they could do that now where they initiate an auction, put a bid in, win if they win, and then they own the 100.
Right. So to get a name directly from the blockchain, you still have to start an auction, and then there's the 5 days of bidding and the 10 days of reveal. So auctions take 2 weeks, and your coins are locked up. If you place a bid, your coins are stuck. They're locked into that auction, which is another game theory thing. It reduces liquidity in an interesting way. But yeah, so the thing that's changed after the first year is there's no more waiting for names to be available. If you can think of a name that's not already on Handshake, you can open an auction immediately. You don't have to wait. It. Right. So like Around the Coin probably is not auctioned. You could start that auction right now.
Man, I got to do that right now.
You should.
How far along is all right, not how far along, but how is the adoption on this? Do you know how many domains or users or however you measure?
Sure. I could throw some ballpark numbers. I haven't checked the stats in a while. There's something around 500,000 names registered on the Handshake blockchain. I wish I knew offhand how that compared to ENS, unstoppable domains, and like that. For comparison, there's only a couple hundred, if that, names in the ICANN root zone. So that's super interesting. There's hundreds of thousands of names. There's probably only around 200, 250 full nodes on the network. That's my guess, being a developer running a lot of nodes and like doing tests and stuff like that. I could tell you some other numbers like, we had HandyCon, which was like an AirMeet conference last week. And there was a steady viewership of around 120 people in each of those events. That's just the English speaking audience and the people who are close enough to like get in. And, there's like maybe 2,000 people in the Telegram channel. And so, it's still very, very early. There's not that many contributors technically. I can think of maybe 10 people off the top of my head that are contributing to the core software and building exciting applications. There's only one, there's a few exchanges, there's a few mining pools. But yeah.
And you guys, it's Handy set up as a 501c3 of nonprofit. Is that
what
right?
What is?
Handy, sorry, not Handy, Handshake.
Right.
Organization. The team.
Okay.
You guys raised, tell me about the funding too. So you got donations or funding?
Sure. Yeah. So this actually happened before my time. And I want to start off by saying that there is no Handshake organization. There's no Handshake Foundation. A lot of other blockchain projects will raise money and keep that money and hire developers and do marketing. And people are always coming into my Telegram channel and asking me to pay them to make YouTube videos about us, or like people want fees to be listed on their crappy crypto coin exchange and stuff like that. We don't have that. And by design, because Handshake was designed and launched and released into the open source public domain like a bird being pushed out of the nest almost right after mainnet. And part of this also involves like Purse.io almost closing and laying off their open source team, which included me and other people working on Handshake. So there was a time when like Handshake had no developers right after mainnet launched. Really, really, really unusual story for a new blockchain project. But since you asked, so before we got there, the founders, I guess they started an LLC or some type of entity, and they raised $10.2 million. Those dollars were immediately given away to open source projects, things like Apache and different Linux distros. And that money was also given away to ENS and Namecoin.
So why did the investors give the 10 million in the first place?
Great question. Because they wanted interest, VC interest, companies like Andreessen Horowitz and Draper Fund and stuff like that. And these participants also acquired HNS at a price of 10 cents per coin, which meant that the day the Genesis block was launched, we already had a price. So that was a purpose, my understanding of raising the money, not about, it was about the price. It was about having a price on day one.
Right. So it's kind of like a private ICO. Is that right to think about it that way?
I mean, I mean, it was public. There is a pre-mine. Like,
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
call it an ICO. There's definitely a pre-mine. There's a huge amount of HNS that was allocated before the coin launched. That's a pre-mine. That's a dirty word in a lot of circles. Those coins were purchased at a fixed price of 10 cents. And then, when the markets opened on day one of the Genesis block, Handshake had a price of 10 cents. So a lot of other blockchain projects will start where the sponsors get a discount, and that factors into the economy. There was no discount here, and honestly, the price stayed basically at 10 cents almost the entire first year. Now it's up to like 30 cents or something like that, which I attribute partly to the success of the project, but mainly just because of basic like cryptocurrencies hitting all-time highs, Bitcoin, Ethereum hitting all-time highs this time of year or recently.
Yeah. I want to ask you, now that we're 45 minutes in, my first question was around Handshake. It's just so interesting what you guys are working on. But I want to ask a little bit about you for a moment. So you were a sound designer for 15 years. You joined, you at some point learned to code, I presume, or got technical when you joined Purse, or at some point. What was that? What were the companies that you moved from?
Sure. I'll tell you my life story as quickly as possible. I went to college, and then I went to music school, and I wanted to be a musician. And I learned music engineering and wanted to be a music engineer and like record rock bands. It turns out musicians don't have any money, so that wasn't really a great market to get into. I found a career at a recording studio in San Francisco where I worked for 15 years. And we were working on corporate videos, mainly radio ads, TV commercials, a little bit of independent film. I did a couple of Game of Thrones episodes. I worked on some TV shows for Discovery. There's some fun stuff in there. I've always been a computer nerd. I was writing programs in BASIC on my Apple II when I was a little kid. When I started bands after college, I wanted to make my own websites. And the thing about working in a recording studio is it's a full-time job, but I had a lot of breaks because I would be booked by the hour. And so there's a lot of time to learn. And I was really interested in programming and learned PHP and did websites and stuff. And in 2013, I learned about Bitcoin. And wow, that was a moment, and there's all the stuff I wanted to learn about cryptography and computer programming and security, and got really obsessed with Bitcoin and the economics and the science or computer science around it, and I actually made a couple pull requests to Bitcoin Core. I've got like 3 commits in Bitcoin Core. In 2016, I made the Bitcoin block clock. I wish I had one I could easily show you, but it's basically art. It's a Bitcoin full node connected to a brightly colored LED display. Maybe I'll show you. Okay, real quick here. I don't want to waste too much of our time.
Take your time. No rush.
Let's see. So there's my Bitcoin block clock. So this is a Bitcoin Core full node running on a Raspberry Pi, and data about the recent blocks and the mempool, and sort of like statistics about the blockchain are being displayed there.
Damn, that's cool.
Thank you. And I've sold a bunch of these and kind of got started in like getting into the Bitcoin art scene with this in 2016.
That's super cool.
And that's how I ended up learning about bcoin. And then the guys at Purse hired me to work for them. And in 2018, I decided to switch careers. And long story short, yeah.
Nice, man. Well, yeah, that was a really good condensed version of it. And that block, can people buy that now?
Sure. I used to sell them on OpenBazaar, which is a decentralized marketplace that uses really interesting multi-sig construction. But it's a lot harder to get on OpenBazaar these days. Just you can email me. Most of the time, I just get emails, or people will direct message me on Twitter. I'm at Matthew Zipkin on Twitter. Pretty easy to find. And
what's that thing go for? What would you?
The block clock goes for $999 for the big one. Yeah. And, it's the software I run on there is open source, and the hardware, the parts list are on GitHub. I would love to see people make their own. But if you want me to make one for you, yeah, it costs some money.
And is there any mining in there? There's not producing any.
No, you can't really mine, not with a Raspberry Pi. I mean, you've seen what Bitcoin mines look like these days.
Yeah. There was actually a guy I talked to a while ago who was doing he had like the company, I forget the name off the top of my head, but they're doing Bitcoin mining on natural gas runoffs. So apparently in the United States, when we drill or we harvest, we get natural gas out of the earth, however we do it, they burn off the excess gas that's not economical to ship. It's kind of expensive to ship. And the amount of natural gas that we burn off in these natural gas mines is equivalent in energy to the amount of energy that Japan uses, period.
Whoa.
Which is just insane. So this company basically created a like mobile container Bitcoin mining rig, and then they go to these sites and snap up to the energy from the natural gas, generator, and they just run these mines. So smart. It's like, man, that's like such a good use case. When people talk about Bitcoin mining being wasteful, it's like you don't really think about the fact that this kind of thing can exist, where it's completely independent of where people live. So yeah, I love that story.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I want to move towards a wrap up here to be conscious of your time.
Sure.
What are you, in representing Handshake, or what is Handshake, or just generally looking for? Are they looking for engineers, contributors, buyers of domains? What's
I could use a sandwich. Just kidding. Users and developers. I mean, like probably how all your guests answer that question. If anything I talked about sounds interesting, if you know JavaScript or C, we have programs in those languages, and we need contributors. It's all open source, and we want people to come in and play with the software and find problems with it and submit pull requests and review pull requests that I write. It's hard. We have a small developer community, and every time I add a feature, I'm like, please, somebody review this code.
Are you getting paid to do this, or are people getting paid?
Yeah. So I have a full-time job, and my job is to work on Handshake open source full-time. Another way to look at it is that my company pays me to make Handshake valuable, to make the price of HNS go up. And that's our profit model. And hopefully that lasts for a while, but it's very hard with no foundation like the Ethereum Foundation or that kind of thing to support development. I got lucky, and hopefully we get more funding and we can hire more developers and stuff like that. Or if the price of Handshake goes up high enough, my company can hire me some coworkers, that kind of thing.
Sweet.
So yeah, developers and people who are just interested in it. Like there's lots of cool content that's being hosted on Handshake. If you're familiar with sites like the Pirate Bay or Sci-Hub or Library Genesis, these are websites that are a little, they're alternate communities, I guess you could say, and they get censored, and it's hard sometimes to find the content that they host. And Handshake is a really interesting use case for them. And so if you have an idea for a project where you don't want to give up, you don't want to rent a name from VeriSign or GoDaddy or something like that. You want to host your own name. Maybe you want HTTP around the coin. Come check it out. Use it. Use Handshake.
I love it. And if I wanted to move around the coin onto Handshake, would we run a duplicate site basically? For a while?
There's a lot of different ways you can do it. And this is the other interesting thing about Handshake, which, because it's optimized to work exactly like the way that DNS works now, we didn't talk too much about it, but Handshake is like ENS is on Ethereum, and they have IPFS and all this cool shit over there. And Namecoin is like a little bit different. You need extra software, and things are kind of funny. And like Handshake is designed to work with the DNS infrastructure that it is right now. So you could have a website. What is you have aroundthecoin.com or aroundthecoin.io or something. You could have the exact same content hosted on just Around the Coin on Handshake and have the same URL, point to the same web server.
Oh, I like that. That's cool. Yeah, we'll do that. I'm gonna go get it before this is posted because
excellent. Let me know if you need any help. I'd love to help you get your content up on a Handshake name.
Awesome. Where can people get a hold of you? You mentioned Twitter. Is that the best place?
Yeah, I'm Matthew Zipkin on Twitter. I'm PinheadMZ on GitHub and Telegram. Handshake.org is like the main landing page for the site, and there's links there to our Telegram group where I live. And bcoin.io has a Slack, and I live on that Slack. So I'm pretty easy to find, I think.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, congrats on all the progress. I love Handshake's project. Just amazing stuff you guys have done. and happy to support you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
All right, man. See ya.